Thank you so much for having us today. I appreciate it greatly. So my name is Beth Bowerman. I'm the Research Services Coordinator here at NAF, and I'm so honored to be speaking with Kelsey Trace today, who's the Research Services Manager. We can go ahead and get started. You can go to the next slide. So before we get started, I want to talk about who is National Ataxia Foundation and what is ataxia. So you'll often hear me refer to the National Ataxia Foundation as NAF. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We were founded in 1957 to search for a cause and for a cure for ataxia. Currently, we have around 7,700 members and a whopping 13 staff members. And so I want to talk a little bit about what is ataxia as well. So ataxia is a rare degenerative disease of the nervous system. It affects the cerebellum, and many symptoms of ataxia mimic those of being drunk. This can include slurred speech, stumbling, falling, and incoordination. It can affect swallowing. The symptoms are very wide and they vary. Ataxia does not discriminate, so it can affect anyone at any age, at any stage of their life. And it can be genetic, and it can also be sporadic, so it can appear for seemingly no reason. And ataxias do represent over 100 rare diseases. So NAF, our vision, we are a patient advocacy group, and our vision is, a big worldwide vision is a world without ataxia, but in the meantime, ensuring nobody experiences ataxia alone until nobody experiences ataxia, period. And then our mission is to accelerate the development of treatments and a cure while working to improve the lives of those living with ataxia. And from there, I will pass it off to Kelsey to talk a little bit about our timeline.
Great, thank you, Beth. And I also wanted to thank the organizers. One little housekeeping thing. During 2020 and 2021, my family has done a lot of takeaway food, and they give it to you in a little brown paper bag when you drive up to the restaurant. So on some of our slides, we have takeaway points, which you'll see with the little brown paper bag, if you will. So as Beth mentioned, the National Ataxia Foundation was founded in 1957. And this is a timeline here, but not so much a timeline with the years evenly spaced, but showing the amplification of pharmaceutical interest in the ataxia space. So we'll start here in 2008. There was one pharmaceutical company engaged with the National Ataxia Foundation, and they were engaged for a Friedreich's ataxia trial, which is a kind of ataxia of the 100 diseases that Beth mentioned. And that trial did ultimately fail. Then in 2009, the NIH funded the RDCRN, or the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, with the support of the Office of Rare Disease Research. And that really spearheaded the ataxia research community to prepare themselves for pharmaceutical involvement. Moving along, in 2012, the National Ataxia Foundation, along with a donor, launched a natural history study called the CRCSCA, or the Clinical Research Consortium for the Study of Cerebellar Ataxias. And again, that also spearheaded some of that pharmaceutical interest in the ataxia space. So both 2009, 2012 were important years at NAF because the launch of these two programs was a direct result in increased engagement from pharmaceutical companies. So 2013 to 2016, the number of pharmaceutical companies ranged from 1 to 4 per year. And then in 2017 through 2019, it peaked in 2019 at 12 pharmaceutical companies contacting NAF. And that's 12 companies, not 12 emails. So it's multiple emails and phone calls over the year from multiple different companies. So that was kind of the tipping point for us. A point when NAF said, what are we going to do to harness this interest and make it easiest and most collaborative for everyone involved? And then that was also a good turning point for us as well. We hosted an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, which is an opportunity for patients to share their story with multiple stakeholders, including the FDA and pharmaceutical partners and many other stakeholders. And that was it was held virtually, and an opportunity for people to talk about their symptoms and how the disease affects their daily life and what treatments would be most meaningful. So then moving on, as I mentioned, 2019 was kind of the year that we had all of this interest and realized we needed to do something about it. So this is a roadmap as this initiative was developed. So NAF's leadership, the executive director, research services director, and development director collaborated with a consultant to think about how we wanted to move forward. So we'll zoom in here on the first part of this roadmap. First, they assessed the needs. So they took the time to sit down and think about what are the needs of our pharmaceutical partners and what are the needs of our research collaborators. That's a term we didn't coin, if you will, but it's an important term. So research doesn't happen without the patients. And therefore, in the research space, we try to refer to our patients as research collaborators because they are the most important part of research. So I'll just go through these items here as we thought about what each side wanted. So pharmaceutical partners looking for a large enough population of patients for clinical trials, and not only large enough, but also what sites would be ready for a clinical trial, where in the United States do the patients live? Are they kind of clustered in certain areas? They also were looking for natural history data. So as I mentioned, we started the natural history study in 2012, and our pharmaceutical partners were hoping to analyze that data as they started to design clinical trials. Also looking for samples. So the natural history data, we were just starting in 2019 to be set up to collect cerebral spinal fluid. We were already collecting blood. So interest in those samples. And then resources about ataxia. So the companies in the pharmaceutical space know a lot about neurodegenerative diseases, but specifically ataxia. You know, it's an area that they might know some about, but as they're designing their clinical trials, they wanted access to key opinion leaders and that expertise from NAF and from the patients. And then also an open exchange of knowledge. So we're a rare disease, right? So there's only so many patients that can participate in the clinical trials, and they needed that open exchange to share their experience in clinical trial design, what worked, what hasn't, depending on the different stages that they were at in clinical trial development. And then here on the other side, the research collaborators, so our patients, they want a voice in the drug development process, which is an ongoing goal. In 2020, the ELPFDD was a great gallery of voices and a way to get the word out, but it's an ongoing process. They want to participate in studies. We hear it all the time that they'll fly to Texas to participate in that study, even knowing that their participation may not mean a treatment for them, but a treatment for the next generation or a better future for the next generation. We often hear that they want to provide biosamples. You know, there can be some hesitancy with CSF collection and other sample collection, but we often hear that they want to do it and they want their questions answered in order to help the scientific community. And then also sharing their patient experience with pharma partners. So looking at this, what do both sides want? They want a treatment for symptom management or modification of the disease. And then we also sat back and thought, you know, where does NAF fit in here? And I'll pause for dramatic effect. But NAF we quickly realized fits in everywhere. So we are a very important part of the bridge between these two parties, and you can almost also add the key opinion leaders in here as well. So after assessing the needs, NAF leadership developed a strategy moving forward. So we knew what we could bring to the table and our value, but how could we materialize that and make this idea efficient for both NAF and for the interested pharma partners who were all at different stages of drug development? What would the structure look like? What would we ask for in terms of funding? Should there be different fees depending on the size of the company, or should we use some other fee structure? What would the name be? That's always a tricky one. What would the companies get in return for their investment? And at this time in 2019, the goal really was to fund our natural history study and to increase that biosample collection, which are both expensive ventures. So we decided that we were going to ask interested pharmaceutical companies to pay a fee to be part of some sort of collective in the pre-competitive space. So NAF leadership spent a lot of time thinking through a budget, listing potential members, developing charter language. They listed member benefits and thought hard about where does NAF fit in. Spent a lot of time modeling, brainstorming, sharing ideas. And then they proposed their initiative. So this initiative centered on the idea of de-risking your R&D investment by investing in the collaborative. Leadership presented the resources of the collaborative to interested pharma parties, and at the time, the membership benefits were access to patient registry and contact data, access to natural history data, invitations to face-to-face NAF-sponsored meetings, and we were asking for a scalable fee based on the company's R&D budget. So that was the plan in January of 2020. And then, of course, we all know in March of 2020, COVID appeared and the whole world stopped. So at that time, we did have a name. Our name was the Drug Development Collaborative. But the benefits that we were offering were kind of all halted by COVID-19. So we were offering natural history data, which included data on an annual basis or annual visits, and visits weren't happening. We were offering access to biosamples, CSF collection, blood, and again, those stopped as well. Access to face-to-face meetings. So we had to sit back and say, okay, what can we offer right now? And in this season of COVID, at the time we thought it would just be a couple months. So we proposed from March 2020 to December 2020, a seat at the table basically. And these were the benefits that we offered at the time. And then we scaled back our fee as well. So at that time, there were 7 companies engaged in the Drug Development Collaborative. Then as we got closer to 2021, we were still hopeful that COVID was going to end and that people would be back in the clinic. But it was also a good time for us to, during this time with advisory committee meetings and the seat at the table, to hear from pharma and hear what they wanted looking forward. So we were able to think about 2021, offer that same seat at the table, but then also think about what pharma companies were looking for and added additional benefits as well. So one of the benefits that we added was, or a request that we were getting, was having a clinical trial ready population. So we can have as many clinical trial ready sites across the United States as possible, but would our community be engaged? And so that is a very important part of 2021 and 2022 for us. So pass it to Beth to talk a little bit more about community engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. So community engagement and our clinical trial ready population. So if you go on the internet and look, there's a ton of resources and information about clinical trials and resources and education, but none of it is targeted specifically towards the rare disease space, really, or more specifically towards our population of ataxia patients. And kind of what they are needing to know and what some of the specific challenges and knowledges that they need to know moving forward. So that's where our clinical trial readiness initiative was born. We launched it in July of 2021. So it's just a series of education materials for the ataxia community it comes out monthly for them, and we're continuing to try and expand this initiative. But topics we've included as basic as, what are placebo-controlled trials, what is informed consent, and what does it mean? What are your rights around informed consent? All the way to, CSF donation, as Kelsey mentioned earlier, that's something our population has struggles with sometimes, is, fear around that. So we're educating them on what it is and including personal experiences from our ataxia community, all the way to COVID-19 and clinical trials. And these formats are articles, blog posts. We've done webinars, videos, and quizzes. So that clinical trial readiness initiative is just really engaging that community, really preparing them for participating in a clinical trial, since we're kind of on the horizon of that starting. And something that was mentioned earlier too was you can never really start that education for your population early enough. We kind of, I feel like, had a quick timeline from, pharma engagement to clinical trials, and we want to get this education out to them as fast as possible, but it's never too early to start that. So moving on, we also have patient panels. So we have quarterly roundtable presentations for our DDC members. So we gather around 4 to 5 patients from our community. They're either patients or caregivers or other people in the space, and we connect them directly to our DDC members or our pharma community. So we talk to them prior about, who the DDC is and who the audience is that they'll be speaking to, and kind of what those main challenges they should be focusing on. They should be focusing on their symptoms, things that could be treated with a therapy. And we talk to them prior, and then they go to the DDC once a quarter and tell their story, share their story. And there's just open communication between our patients and our community to the DDC. So kind of bridging that gap and taking out that middleman. So there's just open communication between the two. And that has been one of the most well-received and needed things that the DDC has gotten. In addition to that, we have an ad hoc patient panel, which is a patient panel just on standby for DDC members if they need a quick survey or quick information from our community. It's just a little bit quicker of a patient panel. We can move on to the next slide. So looking ahead for the DDC for 2022, some new goals and new asks we have. So for new asks, we do have an increased membership fee for this year, and the reasons behind that. We want to improve our clinical trial readiness program. As mentioned earlier, webinars are going to be something that we're going to be launching in 2022 to kind of increase engagement. And so more time in our staff needs to be dedicated to the clinical trial readiness program to kind of engage and make that better. In addition to that, funding our natural history study, the CRC SCA, as Kelsey mentioned earlier, funding that, making it better, making it bigger, all that stuff. And then the genetic testing and counseling initiative launch. So we're hoping to provide genetic testing and counseling to our patients in our community at no cost to them. We're currently in a pilot stage for this, but that's something that we hope to really amplify for 2022 and launch. So that's part of our new asks. And then finally, our ataxia clinical training, or ACT. And this is a group of movement disorder fellows who are getting trained in ataxia and rare disease space to create that next generation of ataxia specialists, to continue creating resources for our patients and to continue with that as well. So for goals for the DDC for 2022, continue to bridge that gap between regulators, industry partners, clinicians, and patients. We really want to amplify the patient voice in the drug development process, and really make sure that their voice is represented and the main voice for the drug development and clinical research. And then also expanding and improving the CRCSEA, that natural history study, revitalizing that with different milestones and really just improving that overall, making that a bigger and better project, because natural history study data is so important. And I did want to mention this takeaway is nothing about us without us. And that is a phrase that I've heard uttered throughout NAF, but it has really stuck with me throughout my time. And so nothing about the ataxia community without them. And I think that's amplifying that patient voice and really making sure that their community is represented, because they are the ones who are most important in this process. You can go ahead to the next slide. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you again to Kelsey for presenting with me, and thank you to the organizers for having us and for everyone for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. I see some in the chat, but also you can email me or Kelsey, and our emails are on the screen there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beth and Kelsey, for a quick presentation. We do have quick questions. Erin is asking if the resources you mentioned, specifically the community engagement resources, are available on your website.
Yes, yeah, so they are available on our website. Something we are working on and want to do too is create a specific landing page for our clinical trial readiness initiative and for these resources. So they're all in one place, they're all amplified. With the webinars, we'll have recordings available, but you can see all of our articles and blog posts. They're on the website, and they're also sent out monthly in our e-newsletter as well.
Great, thank you. Also from Erin, does the genetic testing initiative include testing for all known causes of inherited ataxias?
I can answer that one. So it is a pilot program at the moment. And as a small nonprofit, we have only so much money for the program. So we are starting where there's the most interest for clinical trials. So that would be spinal cerebellar ataxia type 3, and then type 2 and type 1. And also wanted to add that we've learned as we've been piloting this program, which hasn't quite started yet, but genetic counseling is just as important as the genetic testing. So we're starting there, and then if a patient decides to move on to genetic testing, but that's something that we have learned throughout the planning process for this.
And Susan is asking regards to pilot program, who's funding it? Is it industry partner or NAF?
Yeah, great question. So NAF is funding the pilot program because it was something that was asked for by members of our pharmaceutical consortium, and it's important to them. And they do pay a fee to be a part of the consortium. Some of the funds from the consortium will go towards the genetic testing program.
Thank you, Kelsey. And we answered all the questions we see in the chat. If there's anything else, please feel free. Erin, yes, go ahead, unmute yourself, ask a question.
Hello. Thank you so much, Beth and Kelsey. Your presentation was wonderful, and I have so many follow-up questions. But one other question, I was just wondering with regard to the samples that you're collecting and the biorepository that you are developing. Is this mostly housed at one site, or are you implementing kind of a virtual biorepository model where samples are collected and stored at multiple sites? I'm just asking as this is something that at the foundation I'm with, the APBD Research Foundation, is looking to get involved in.
Yeah, certainly. So this was another area that took a lot of thinking and strategizing and, you know, wondering what does this acronym mean, that sort of thing. We have a great consortium of clinical investigators across the United States that are part of the CRC SCA we mentioned. And so we often lean on them for advice. And we thought about, could we use one university as a biorepository, and what university would that be? And we ended up working with, there's another study called Ready SCA, and it's a sister study. It's NIH funded. So because we're sister studies, we're working with the NIH with BioSend at Indiana University to store the CSF and other biosamples. So it's really been looking to our advisors in the consortium to kind of figure out the best way to store that. It's been a challenge, especially as non-scientists, to figure out the best way, but I don't that's the route we've gone.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. I am a little bit familiar with the biorepository work at Indiana University, so that's a great site to be plugged into.
Yeah, they have been super wonderful to work with. I can't say enough good things about them. So.
Thank you. Anyone else has a question? Please feel free to unmute and ask. I think we are done with questions. As Councilman Beth mentioned, please email them if you come up with any other questions or have any follow-up. Their website is still here on the screen. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining today.
Thank you
for
organizing.